Detective Jordan Hayes stepped out of the precinct late at night, exhausted after a grueling 14-hour shift. The cold wind bit into his skin as he adjusted the hood of his red sweatshirt over his head. The city streets were quiet, save for the occasional hum of a car passing by or the distant murmur of voices in nearby buildings. The corner store just down the block was the only place open, and Hayes decided to grab something to keep himself awake for the long drive home. As he walked down the dimly lit sidewalk, Hayes could feel the weight of the day pressing on him. The cases he'd been working on had drained him mentally and emotionally, but he kept reminding himself of why he chose this line of work: to serve and protect. He pushed the door open to the small store, the bell above jingling softly. The store clerk, a middle-aged man with a tired smile, greeted him. "Evening. Rough night?" "You could say that," Hayes replied with a small nod, his voice heavy with fatigue. He grabbed a bottle of water and a pack of gum from the shelf. He had no intention of lingering, just a quick in and out so he could finally head home. Meanwhile, just across the street, Officer Kyle Brennan sat in his patrol car. Brennan's shift had been uneventful so far, and his frustration was mounting. Earlier, dispatch had reported a potential robbery suspect in the area, a black male wearing dark clothing. The description was vague at best, but Brennan had convinced himself that tonight was his chance to prove himself. When Brennan spotted Hayes entering the store, his pulse quickened. The red hoodie wasn't exactly dark clothing, but it was close enough in his mind. He watched intently as Hayes moved through the store, scrutinizing every movement. When Hayes reached into his pocket, likely for his wallet, Brennan's mind jumped to conclusions. "That must be him," Brennan muttered to himself, gripping the steering wheel. "Fits the description. Acting suspicious." Hayes, oblivious to Brennan's gaze, paid for his items and exchanged a brief word with the clerk before heading out into the chilly night. "Thanks, man. Stay safe out there," the clerk said as Hayes grabbed his water and gum. "You too," Hayes replied, giving a polite nod. As Hayes stepped outside, he noticed a patrol car parked across the street. It wasn't unusual to see officers in the area, but something about the way the headlights seemed fixed on him made him uneasy. Shaking off the feeling, he began walking toward his car, parked a short distance away. Brennan started his engine, pulling slowly out of his spot to follow Hayes. He kept his distance, but stayed close enough to observe. To him, every step Hayes took seemed calculated, suspicious. Hayes, now more aware of the patrol car trailing him, stopped briefly and glanced over his shoulder. "What the hell," he muttered under his breath. He wasn't new to being watched or judged based on his appearance, it came with the territory of being a black man in the city. But tonight, after the day he'd had, he wasn't in the mood to deal with unnecessary drama. Reaching his car, Hayes unlocked the door and opened it. Just as he was about to get in, Brennan flipped on his lights and siren, pulling up behind him. "Hey! Stop right there!" Brennan shouted as he stepped out of the car, his hand hovering over his holstered gun. Hayes froze, one hand on his car door. He turned slowly, his face a mix of confusion and annoyance. "What's the problem, officer?" "Step away from the vehicle," Brennan ordered, his tone sharp and authoritative. "Step away?" Hayes asked, raising an eyebrow. "What for?" "I haven't done anything wrong." "You match the description of a suspect in a robbery," Brennan said, moving closer but keeping his distance. His hand remained near his weapon, his eyes narrowing as he studied Hayes. Hayes sighed, his exhaustion giving way to irritation. "A suspect? In a red hoodie? That's all it takes?" Brennan's jaw tightened. "I need you to cooperate. Turn around, hands where I can see them." Hayes shook his head, chuckling bitterly. "You've got to be kidding me." "Look, officer, I'm not the guy you're looking for. I just came from the store, bought water and gum. That's it." Brennan ignored his words. "Turn around," he repeated, louder this time. The tension between them was thick, and a few passers-by began to slow down, their curiosity piqued by the flashing lights and raised voices. Hayes, aware of the growing audience, decided to comply, for now. He turned around, raising his hand slightly. This is ridiculous, he muttered. Brennan approached cautiously, his heart pounding. Do you have any weapons on you? No, Hayes replied firmly. No weapons, no stolen goods, just my ID and a badge. Badge? Brennan repeated, his skepticism evident. Hayes nodded. Yeah, badge. I'm a detective with this department. You'd know that if you bothered to ask, instead of jumping to conclusions. Brennan faltered for a moment but quickly regained his composure. We'll see about that. Keep your hands where I can see them. By now, a small crowd had gathered, some pulling out their phones to record the scene. Hayes noticed the cameras but stayed calm, knowing this could escalate quickly if he wasn't careful. Officer, he said, his voice steady but firm, reach into my back pocket. You'll find my wallet. Inside is my badge and ID. Go ahead, check. Brennan hesitated, his eyes darting between Hayes and the growing crowd. Reluctantly, he reached into Hayes's back pocket and pulled out the wallet. Flipping it open, he froze. There it was, Detective Jordan Hayes's badge, shining under the streetlights. For a moment, neither man spoke. The murmurs from the crowd grew louder, their phones capturing every detail. You see it now, don't you? Hayes said, his voice laced with anger. I'm not some random suspect. I'm a detective. And you, he pointed a finger at Brennan. You profiled me. Brennan stepped back, his face flushing with embarrassment and anger. I was just doing my job, he said defensively. Your job? Hayes shot back, taking a step forward. Your job is to protect and serve, not harass your own colleagues because they fit a description. Do you even realize how dangerous this could have been? If I wasn't who I am, how far would you have taken this? The crowd began to murmur louder, some shouting in support of Hayes. Brennan glanced around, realizing the situation was spiraling out of control. Look, let's just calm down, Brennan said, trying to regain control. We can sort this out back at the station. Hayes shook his head, his frustration boiling over. No, we're sorting this out right here. In front of everyone. They need to see how this department treats its own. How you treat black men, badge or no badge. The crowd erupted in cheers and shouts, some calling for justice, others berating Brennan. The tension was palpable, and Hayes could feel the weight of his exhaustion mixed with anger and disbelief. Just then, another patrol car pulled up, and two more officers stepped out. One of them, Sergeant Mills, recognized Hayes immediately. Detective Hayes? Mills called out, hurrying over. What's going on here? You tell me, Sergeant, Hayes said, his voice sharp. Your officer here decided I looked suspicious and decided to detain me. Mills turned to Brennan, his expression dark. Is this true? I thought he was the suspect from earlier, Brennan stammered. He matched the description. Matched the description? Mills echoed, his voice rising. Do you even know who you're talking to? Detective Hayes has been with this department for